Chapter 18. Welcome back. Zhao Kongqing was stunned. He really didn't expect that this seemingly ordinary high school student would speak with such maturity and depth. He suddenly realized how ridiculous it had been to try to appeal to the typical teenage idealism and fervor. Lin Xie was not an ordinary high school student. Lin Xie stood up and walked straight to the door. After a moment of hesitation, he stopped and said, "Thanks for telling me all this. I'll sign the confidentiality agreement." With that, he pushed the door open and walked out. This time, Zhao Kongqing sat silently on the edge of the bed, his body slightly rising as if he wanted to stop him. After a brief pause, he sank back down with a sense of helplessness. He knew what this boy represented, and that he had a mission to bring him back, but he couldn't do it. "Xiaoqi, you're finally back. Why aren't you in your school uniform today?" "Auntie, I was in a rush this morning and forgot to put it on." "You child. If you're not in uniform, won't the teachers scold you? They only said a couple of words." "It's fine." "Sigh, Xiaoqi, you just transferred to a new school. You can't leave a bad impression on the teachers. Be a bit more careful." "Got it, Auntie." "How's it going with your classmates? They're not being exclusionary, are they?" "No, we're getting along well. They even walked me home, and I returned the favor." That's good, that's good. I'm going to my room now, Auntie." "All right, get some rest early." Bang! Lin Xie closed his bedroom door and lay back on his bed, staring at the night sky outside the window, letting out a long sigh. This world was far more complicated than he had imagined, but it didn't concern him much. After a short rest, Lin Xie sat up and started undressing when a hard object fell out of his pocket. Clink, clink. Lin Xie looked down, picked up the object, and frowned in confusion. It was a metal ornament, something like a crest, slightly larger than a $1 coin. It had a faintly cool touch, and it was made of some unknown material. On the front of the crest, two straight swords crossed each other, glowing with a soft blue light. Behind the swords was a night sky sprinkled with stars, and the craftsmanship was exquisite. At the bottom of the design were the words, Zhao Kongqing. "This is..." Lin Xie squinted. He recalled that Zhao Kongqing had reached into his pocket during their walk to the hotel. Did he accidentally drop it? Lin Xie examined the crest and flipped it over. On the back, a few lines of small text were engraved. "If the dark night falls, I shall stand before the myriad, crossing the sword into the abyss, and dye the heavens with blood." What a bold sentiment. Did Zhao Kongqing write this himself? Or is it some kind of night watchman's creed? Lin Xie muttered. He seems so out of it. I wouldn't have thought he could write something like this. After playing with it for a while, Lin Xie placed it on the desk, changed his clothes, and climbed into bed. Tonight, he had something very important to do. He closed his eyes and immersed his consciousness into the mental asylum of the gods in his mind. At that moment, in the asylum's courtyard, Nyx was sitting in a rocking chair, holding a bunch of bottles and jars, seemingly mumbling to herself, a smile occasionally appearing on her lips. Ignoring the murkiness in her eyes and the odd items in her arms, her regal presence made for a strikingly beautiful scene. Soon after, Lin Xie, dressed in a white lab coat, walked slowly towards her. To better fit the role of a psychiatrist, Lin Xie had borrowed a white coat from the director's office and even clipped a pair of plain glasses onto the collar. At a glance, it did look quite convincing. Lin Xie walked to the rocking chair and silently observed Nyx's murky, vacant eyes, letting out a sigh. According to the mythological texts he had read, Nyx was indeed one of the oldest and most powerful deities in Greek mythology, with a top-tier status and power. But compared to other gods, she had one major characteristic. She loved to have children. From Lin Xie's calculations, Nyx had at least 20 children, including the famous death god Thanatos, the sleep god Hypnos, as well as gods of space, fate, misfortune, and more. Except for a few, most of Nyx's children were evil gods who brought calamity upon the world, with many meeting tragic ends. From snippets of mythological stories, Lin Xie couldn't gather more detailed information about this dark goddess, but he speculated that Nyx's current condition might be related to her children. The psychiatrist at Sunlight Asylum had said that a male patient, missing his wife, imagined she was still with him. Could Nyx's condition be similar? Perhaps she missed her children so much that she started treating the bottles and jars as her children? But what had happened to her children to provoke such a severe reaction from Nyx? And could an ancient deity with divine power truly experience such intense emotions? Or had she been stripped of her divine body and status before her breakdown? Lin Chia couldn't say. Hypnos, don't be impatient. Your brother will be back soon. He's just been playing around for a while. Thanatos has always been troublemaker. When he comes back, he'll need a good talking to. Nyx caressed the vase in her hands, gazing into the distance with a glimmer of hope that quickly turned murky again. She paused, her raspy voice trembling. But why hasn't he returned in 3,000 years? Watching this, Lin Chia felt an unexpected pang of sorrow. Who would have thought that the once mighty goddess of the night was now so helpless and vulnerable? She was a goddess of the night, but also a mother waiting for her child to return. To cure her, I need to address the root cause. Lin Chia's mind echoed the psychiatrist's words as he bowed his head, deep in thought. The root cause. Nyx's illness was due to her lost children. To heal her, he had to find her children, but these were renowned Greek gods. It was impossible to track them all down and bring them to Nyx, right? Moreover, Lin Chia wasn't even sure if they were brought to this world by the mist, let alone where to find so many deities. Even if he did find them, would these evil gods really come along willingly? Lin Chia furrowed his brows in contemplation when a sudden flash of insight struck him. Perhaps this could work? Lin Chia stood up, his gaze fixed on Nyx with a troubled expression, but he made up his mind and took a step forward. In Nyx's vacant stare, Lin Chia walked slowly to her, gently knelt down, extended his arms to embrace Nyx, and whispered in her ear, "Mother, I'm back." At that moment, Nyx's eyes suddenly sparkled with unprecedented brilliance. She trembled as she reached out her hands and tightly hugged Lin Chia. After a long time, she finally managed to utter a complete sentence. "Welcome back, Thanatos, my child." Chapter 19. The Starry Night Dancer. The moment Nyx spoke those words, a virtual panel appeared before Lin Chia's eyes. Nyx's treatment progress, 3%. Reward conditions met. Beginning random draw for Nyx's divine abilities. ***. Immediately, a virtual roulette wheel appeared and began spinning rapidly. Lin Chia could see that the wheel was divided into over 20 sections, each roughly the same size, meaning that the chances of landing on each divine ability were equal. Nightfall, Dim Eye, Fallen Stars, Starliasu, Night Flicker, Night's Minions, Exalted Fertility. The spinning wheel dazzled Lin Chia with its myriad abilities, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was mixed in. Exalted Fertility? What the heck is that? Is that really a divine ability? If I draw that, does it mean I wouldn't even need a wife to have a bunch of divine children? Actually, that doesn't sound too bad. At the same time, Lin Chia noticed a narrow black section, different from the other abilities, occupying about 1% of the wheel. The divine ability here was labeled Unknown. Unknown? What does that mean? But that wasn't important. Lin Chia was sure that with his lousy luck, he probably wouldn't draw Unknown, even if he spun 1,000 times. Lin Chia took a deep breath and focused intently on the spinning wheel. With a thought, the wheel began to slow down. The pointer glided over the various abilities and finally landed on one. Starry Night Dancer. Lin Chia saw the words and sighed in resignation. By the name alone, this ability seemed to fall short compared to things like Starliasu or Fallen Stars, but at least, it wasn't Exalted Fertility. This luck is typical of me. As the wheel stopped, it gradually faded away, leaving only the words Starry Night Dancer hovering in the air, their color growing more profound. Lin Chia reached out and grasped them. Immediately, the 4 words transformed into a black light, which flowed into Lin Chia's body. He felt a mysterious energy swiftly transforming him, cleansing both his soul and flesh, providing an extraordinary sense of comfort. The sensation was truly marvelous. After about 5 seconds, as the feeling dissipated, Lin Chia clearly felt that his body had changed. A few lines of text slowly appeared before his eyes. Starry Night Dancer ***. In the dark, your speed, strength, endurance, and recovery are all 5 times greater than usual. In the dark, you are less noticeable to others. In the dark, your intimidation factor towards other beings is increased. You gain the ability to communicate with other nocturnal creatures. Lin Chia gasped in awe. This ability, which seemed low profile, turned out to be extremely powerful. Just the fact that it enhances speed, strength, and endurance by 5 times was already extraordinary. Even with his ordinary physical condition, If he participated in an Ironman competition at night, he would surely set a Guinness World Record. The five-fold enhancement could push his body to near human limits, and this was only with his average physical state. With systematic training, Lin Chia couldn't imagine how much he could grow, not to mention the stealth and communication abilities with nocturnal animals. These were entirely beyond human scope. Suppressing his excitement, Lin Chia took a deep breath. He had no intention of joining the Night Watchers or battling mythical creatures, but as a high school student, it was impossible not to be fascinated by supernatural powers. Moreover, strengthening himself would allow him to better protect his family. Lin Chia finally composed himself and turned his gaze back to Nyx. At this moment, Nyx was gazing at him tenderly, gently stroking his hair, and murmuring to herself, "Thanatos, where have you been all these 3,000 years? Do you know how much I've missed you?" Lin Chia sat silently, his eyes full of complex emotions. As he had guessed, Nyx couldn't distinguish between her child and a vase at this point. How could she recognize that Lin Chia wasn't her child? She was so afflicted by longing that she mistook everything around her as her children. But those bottles and jars were not real people and couldn't respond to Nyx. So, when Lin Chia appeared as a living, breathing, and calling her mother, Nyx seemed to come alive, finally finding her emotional anchor. This was the first step to opening her heart and the reason why the treatment progress jumped to 3%. "Thanatos, do you know how much your brother misses you? Come give him a hug," Nyx said with a smile, holding a vase out to Lin Chia. Lin Chia. Reluctantly, Lin Chia took the vase and pretended to pet it. Just then, his peripheral vision caught sight of Nyx's other siblings. His whole body stiffened. In Nyx's arms were several bottles with labels, each a different color. One of the labels clearly read, "Chlorpromazine, for gods." Lin Chia stared at it, his mouth growing wider and wider. Chlorpromazine? Why does that name sound so familiar? Isn't that the medication listed in the psychiatrist's inventory earlier today? And it has the words, "For gods?" In that moment, Lin Chia suddenly had an epiphany and became extremely excited. He handed the vase back to Nyx and hurriedly said, "I'll be right back." Then he dashed up to the second floor of the asylum, finding a room at the end of the hallway. The medication storage room. The door was open. Nyx must have been here earlier, otherwise, she wouldn't have taken so many siblings. Lin Chia quickly entered and began searching. Finally, he stopped in front of a huge metal cabinet, his eyes gleaming brighter. Before him was a wall of medications. These medications were varied, with most used for psychiatric treatment, including chlorpromazine, as well as many sedatives. All these medications had the label, "For gods." A smile appeared on Lin Chia's face. He should have realized it sooner. This was a psychiatric hospital for gods. Naturally, it would have a room for storing medications specifically for divine beings. While he couldn't bring real-world medications to the asylum, he could find corresponding divine medicines here. With this discovery, things seemed to have become much simpler. Lin Chia grabbed a few bottles of the medications listed by the psychiatrist earlier and rushed back downstairs to Nyx. "Here, this one is once a day, 2 pills each time. And this one is 3 times a day, 1 pill each time. Remember to take them." Nyx looked at Lin Chia with a smile as if he had a flower on his face, seemingly not hearing his words at all. "Ugh, never mind. I'll just come and give them to you every day," Lin Chia sighed, seeing Nyx's reaction. Expecting a severe mental patient to remember to take her medicine was a bit too much. Upon hearing Lin Chia's words, Nyx's face lit up with a beaming smile. She was genuinely happy.